Wine School. I'm Mike. With me as always, Eric. We got a couple guests with us today. We got Marty and Sterling. Welcome, guys. And today we're going to talk about oak, and we're going to drink a Valserrano Gran Riserva Rioja from 2004. Today's Wine School, today's class is brought to you by LA Beach Fit. So if you want to get a body like this, you can.
And who doesn't?
Who doesn't, right? That's the bomb. Check them out at labeachfit.com. They run boot camps in LA. Get you shredded up. Anyways, today we're going to talk about oak. And you hear a lot of people talking about oak and what it is and throwing, oh, I get oaky this and oaky that. Why do we care about oak? There's two reasons why we make wine in oak. And the first one is because we want a little bit of oxygen to get into the wine. Oxygen changes the character of wine. So if you put wine into a barrel and you let it age, just a little tiny bit of oxygen comes through the wood. There's just enough holes in it that'll allow some oxygen to come through, and that oxygen will change the character of the wine, and it'll season it over time. Just like when you open up a bottle of wine, sometimes you put it in a decanter just to get a little bit more oxygen. Well, oak allows you to give that over time. Secondly, oak will impart an oaky flavor to the wine, and some people find that pleasurable. I myself am not a huge fan of over-oaked wines. I think I prefer to taste the grape and not the wood that the grape was baked in. But it does provide structure and tannins and flavor. And so we've chosen a wine today. Rioja is known for being made in oak. And one of the things that you'll see is the amount of oak flavor that's imparted to the wine is contingent on two things. One, how big the barrel is. So if you have a little teeny tiny barrel like this and you put wine in it, almost all the wine is touching wood, right? But sometimes you have these huge barrels that literally you can walk inside, that they're aging wine in. And so then it just adds a really light type of flavor. The standard size barrel is the ones that you see, when you go to like a wine store or whatever, like sitting around. They hold about 300 bottles. And so the amount of flavor that comes through from a barrel depends on how new the barrel is. The first year you use it, it sucks about 80% of the flavor out of it. And then every year thereafter, it kind of sucks a little bit more. And after it's about 6 or 7 years old, it becomes what we call neutral. So it doesn't really impart a lot of woody flavor, but you still get the oxygen coming through it. That wine barrel, that one that holds 300 bottles, a new barrel costs about anywhere from, let's say, $1,200 to $1,500, and it holds 300 bottles. So it adds $4 per bottle, $4 to $5 per bottle to the price of the wine, and that's for the producer. So in order for a producer to make that back, they got to be able to sell that bottle of wine for $20 more at least, right? So you tend to see the more expensive wines are aged in oak, and the less expensive wines are aged in steel. A couple different types of oak. We get oak mainly from France and America. The American oak tends to have wider grains. Why? Because it's warmer here and the trees grow faster, so the rings are wider apart. The French oak, it's colder, grows smaller, you get tighter rings. Obviously, the tighter the grain, the different the flavor profile that can be imparted. The wider the grain, a lot of times it imparts more flavor or slightly different flavor. Then the next thing that happens is we play games with the oak. So let's say I'm making cheap wine, but I want it to taste expensive. The easy way to do that, you get a big bag of oak chips, huck it in the stainless steel vat that you're making wine, and voila.
It's like mesquite.
Exactly. But it isn't actually aged in oak, it's just sort of flavored with the oak. And we see that a lot. The other thing that we can do is we can change the surface area of the barrel. So an easy way of doing that is let's route some grooves down the inside of the barrel. And now instead of it just being flat, it goes like this, right? And on the inside. And by doing that, you can add, you can double the surface area of the barrel that's touching wine. Or you can toast the inside of the barrel. You actually get a torch and burn it, char it. And that also, makes the surface more rough and imparts a different type of flavor and a little bit more flavor. So you'll see wineries playing all kinds of games. There's actually a winery called Del Dotto in Napa that every year they just press one big bunch of grapes, and then they put the grapes in like 10 different types of barrels. French oak, American oak, grooved American oak, toasted grooved American oak, non-toasted but grooved, only toasted but not grooved, and then they make all these different wines. And then when you taste them, they're totally different. It's amazing how it works. So anyways, that's the basis for oak and wine. And what we want to do is we want to be able to identify the flavor profile of the oak. So oak generally is going to impart vanilla, sweetness, toastiness, burnt toast, caramel, that type of a thing. Rioja, which is what we're about to drink, tends to use more American oak, so you'll get like a vanilla or even like a suntan lotion kind of a smell to it. I do want to talk a little bit about Rioja because I love Rioja. Rioja, in my opinion, if you want aged wine, cheap, relatively cheap, Spain's the way to go. You can get Riojas that are 10, 15 years old at extremely reasonable prices as opposed to, Cabernets from Napa or Bordeaux from France or whatever. So I'm a huge fan of Rioja. I think it's a great drinking wine. This is a 2004, so it's 10 years old, pretty solid. And it's also a Gran Riserva, which means it's spent more time in oak barrels than a regular wine. Anyways, that's a lengthy explanation. Questions about oak?
Do you recycle the barrels, or is it one time and then you throw it out?
Well, so interesting. It depends. If you're making like a real high-end cult cab, where people expect that, you're making Screaming Eagle and it's $1,000 a bottle or whatever. Yeah, you expect that oak flavor every time, so you age it in the oak. They typically wouldn't reuse that, but what they do is they'd sell it for $200 to the winery down the street, who'd use it and get 10% of the flavor out of it.
Right.
So some wineries literally will just keep recycling the barrels down inside the winery, and some sell them. Go ahead.
Do they get turned into chips like you were saying earlier, or they just
No.
stay as barrels?
Typically, once it's made into a barrel, because you can make the chips, like you go to wherever the cooper is that's making the barrels and just scoop up all the shit that's lying on the ground and throw it in a mesh bag, and there you go. You need to chop up your barrel that you paid $1,200 for, right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So, and a lot of times what you'll see is that wineries will have a certain percentage in oak. So they'll do like 30% new oak. And so every year they sort of get 30% new barrels, and then they rotate them down. And there are places in Europe where they're using the same barrels. They've used the same barrels for 150 years.
How come in Italy you didn't mention that they have a lot of oak wines?
Well, so every country has wines that are made in oak, and every country has wines that are aged in stainless steel.
They're just more prevalent in France and Napa.
I would say they're sort of equally prevalent as a percentage across most of the wine producing countries. You do get some countries where they tend to do most of the things in stainless steel, like Australia, for example. Probably a higher percentage is done in stainless.
So does that give it more fruity taste if it's in stainless steel?
What it does is it doesn't give it the oak flavor. Right.
And what about if you compare like a Pinot Noir to Cabernet? The Cabernet typically has an oakier flavor, or do Pinots have oaky?
Totally depends on the producer. If the producer decided to age it in oak, it's going to have an oaky flavor. It could be a Pinot, could be a Cabernet. I think, in my opinion, you're probably more likely to see expensive cabs aged in oak and expensive Pinots aged in more neutral oak. Particularly in Burgundy, where you want the flavor of the vine as opposed to the flavor of the wood.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of over-oaked wines, to be honest. I think it really detracts. But anyway, so with that, let's get our noses in here. we got this fantastic Rioja sitting in front of us, and let's see if we can pick up those oak flavors and what they might look like or smell like.
I smell the vanilla.
Yeah.
High vanilla, right? You get any like caramel or toast?
Oh yeah, I'm
or-
sorry, the caramel.
Yeah.
You mentioned
You're
it.
the toast.
Any suntan lotion?
I was trying to sense that, but I
You get
can't.
copper tone on this? I get very little copper tone.
SPF 30.
But yeah, this is definitely an oaky wine, and I assume it's probably gonna play out in the mouth as well. So let's drink it and find out. And you can really tell that sweetness, right?
Mm-hmm.
That vanilla. And,
Typically, I prefer ones that, like you said, aren't overly oaky, I guess.
why is that?
Because I like the grape flavor
Mhm.
and more like a sweet type wine.
Yep.
But I like this a lot, even though.
This is a classic example of a traditional Rioja. It's beautiful. And for me, I also get, in addition to the oak, I also tend to get almost like a sweet and sour Chinese restaurant-y kind of jammy fruit, sensational Rioja. And I
know
definitely get that a little bit on this as well.
Sometimes when you go to a restaurant, they say like, "Oh, this food would taste good with
Yeah,
this kind of
like
wine." What type of food goes well with?
Oh,
Anything.
well, that's the $1 million question, right? Like, we're always trying to figure out, the whole point of wine is to have it with food, right? And they enhance each other synergistically. Like, they both get better if you can have the right thing. However, they can also both get worse if you put the wrong things with it. So some thoughts. One of the things to think about is if it grows together, it goes together. And this is because, especially in Europe, where they've been growing grapes for 1,000, 2,000 years, they kind of figure out like what the local stuff that gets made food-wise and the local grapes that get grown kind of go together. So you think about what's grown in Spain, or what kind of food is prevalent in Spain. A lot of ham, right? A lot of salted ham, prosciutto, salami, that kind of thing. This would probably go fantastic with that. Some soft cheeses, some goat's milk cheese.
Yeah, I bet this would go really well.
I'm
with
having a
Go.
piece of dark chocolate with this.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh,
That'd be amazing.
Chocolate cheese and Rioja.
yeah. There's a lot of nuances to this, and we could argue ad infinitum on whether or not you should pair this thing with that thing. I think there is a certain amount of individual tastes, and so for me, I just try it. I just try a bunch of shit. You know?
See what works.
Yeah, and 20% of the time it works out terribly. 20% of the time it's awesome, and then 60% of the time I'm like, well, I'm going to try something a little bit different. But this is how we tell wine or oak on wine, and you'll get it in reds and in whites, and you can draw conclusions about that. You can decide maybe it's a more expensive wine or a higher quality wine, although, like I said, people cheat the system by hucking in the chips. And that's what you do. So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us at Wine School. As always, we're going out with 30 seconds of craziness. Today's craziness brought to you from Sanchez. Check them out on iTunes. The song is Gravity. Enjoy.
Baby, I'm not Prince Charming, I'll try to harm you. I mean it right through and through. I'm a self-indulgent asshole. I don't enjoy the latest hassle. I'll get my kicks abusing you. So, baby, can't you see? Concept of reciprocity is foreign element to me. Baby, can't you see? You don't need no gravity, 'cause center